The moment Captain Garrett Cross saw her walk through the perimeter gate 4 days after they'd left her to die, every muscle in his body locked. She wasn't stumbling, wasn't delirious, wasn't even breathing hard. She just walked straight through the shocked silence of 200 men who thought they'd never see her again, her boots barely raising dust, her expression as calm as if she'd stepped out for a morning jog instead of surviving the Mojave desert with zero supplies and nothing but the clothes on her back. And the worst part, the part that made his stomach drop, was that she was smiling, just slightly, like she knew exactly what was about to happen next. 72 hours earlier, none of them had seen it coming. The joint training exercise had been running smoothly until Lieutenant Ava Morgan arrived. Blonde, late 20s, quiet in a way that didn't invite conversation. She'd shown up with minimal gear and zero fanfare, assigned as an observer from an unnamed unit, which immediately annoyed Cross because observers slowed things down, asked questions, disrupted rhythm. He'd made his opinion clear the first time she questioned one of his decisions during a tactical briefing. "With respect, Captain," she'd said, her voice even, "that route leaves your flank exposed for over a mile." The room had gone silent. 20 officers staring, waiting to see how he'd handle being corrected by someone who wasn't even part of the command structure. Cross had smiled tightly. "I've run this exercise 6 times. I think I know what I'm doing." She'd nodded once, said nothing more, and wrote something in a small notebook. That had been the first crack. The second came during a live navigation drill when she'd pointed out politely, calmly, that his map coordinates were off by nearly 2 clicks. He'd checked. She was right. But instead of gratitude, he'd felt irritation, sharp and immediate, because now his men were watching, whispering, wondering why this quiet observer knew more than their commanding officer. By day 3, Cross had decided she was a problem. Not because she caused trouble, but because she made him look like he didn't know his own field. And that was unacceptable, so when the opportunity came, he took it. It was supposed to be a standard desert survival drop, each participant given coordinates, basic supplies, and 12 hours to navigate back to camp. Cross had done it 100 times. His men knew the drill, except when Morgan's name came up on the roster, Cross made a decision. "She wants to observe," he'd muttered to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Briggs. "Let her observe what real survival looks like." Briggs had hesitated. "Sir, regulations say she's not in our chain of command," Cross interrupted. "She volunteered to be here. Let's see what she's actually made of." The helicopter dropped her 16 miles out, deep in a section of the Mojave where the heat hit 118 degrees by midday and the terrain offered zero shade. Standard drop for experienced personnel, except Cross gave the order to leave her pack behind. No water, no compass, no radio, just her and the desert. Briggs had looked uneasy. "Captain, that's a lesson," Cross finished coldly. "If she's as good as she acts, she'll figure it out." The helicopter lifted off, leaving Morgan standing alone in the sand, watching them disappear into the white-hot sky. Cross told himself it was justified. A little humility would do her good. She'd find her way back eventually, maybe take a day longer than expected, and she'd learn to keep her opinions to herself. What he didn't expect was the silence. Hour 12 came and went, no sign of her. Hour 24, still nothing. By hour 36, Cross started feeling the first prickle of unease. The desert was unforgiving, and without water the human body shut down fast. Dehydration, heat stroke, organ failure, it didn't take long. "Should we send a team?" Briggs asked quietly. Cross shook his head. "She'll turn up." But she didn't. 48 hours, 72. The silence in camp grew heavier. Men stopped joking, started watching the horizon. A few asked questions Cross didn't want to answer. On the morning of day 4, Cross stood outside the command tent, staring at the empty desert, trying to calculate how to explain this, how to write the report, how to justify what he'd done. That's when Briggs' voice crackled over the radio, tight with something Cross couldn't identify. "Sir, you need to see this." Cross walked to the perimeter, his jaw tight, expecting a medevac situation, a body, something he'd have to spin into an accident. Instead, he saw her. Walking through the gate, blonde hair pulled back, face calm, posture straight. Not a scratch on her, not a tremor in her step. She stopped 10 feet from him, met his eyes, and spoke in that same steady voice he'd grown to hate. "Captain Cross." His mouth went dry. Around them, 200 soldiers had gone completely still. How he started, she tilted her head slightly. You left me in the desert with no water, no gear, and no comms. Her tone didn't rise. Did you think that would stop me? And in that moment, Cross realized he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Because the woman standing in front of him wasn't just surviving, she was hunting. Captain Cross tried to recover quickly, but his voice came out thinner than he wanted. Lieutenant Morgan, I don't know what you think happened, but I know exactly what happened, she said, cutting him off without raising her volume. You gave the order to leave my gear on the helicopter. 16 miles out, no supplies, no comms. You called it a lesson. Silence spread like a shockwave. Every man within earshot had stopped moving. Briggs stood frozen beside Cross, his face pale. Cross forced a tight smile. You're clearly dehydrated, confused. Let's get you to medical, and I'm not confused. Her eyes locked onto his. And I'm not dehydrated. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metal tin, flipping it open to reveal a collection of plant fibers, a makeshift char cloth, and a piece of flint. Found water in a dried wash 2 miles east of the drop zone. Dug down 18 inches, let it filter through layered sand. Built shade using thermal layering principles and native vegetation. She said it like she was reciting a grocery list. Cross stared. Around them, murmurs started rippling through the ranks. Someone whispered, how the hell? Morgan's gaze didn't waver. You wanted to see what I was made of, Captain. Now you know. Cross felt control slipping. He stepped forward, trying to reassert authority. You still violated protocol by surviving. Her voice stayed calm, but something in it sharpened. Or by making you look incompetent in front of your men. The words landed like a slap. A few soldiers nearby didn't even bother hiding their reactions, eyes widening, glances exchanged. Cross jaw tightened. That's insubordination. No, Morgan said quietly. That's accountability. Briggs cleared his throat. Sir, maybe we should stand down, Lieutenant, Cross snapped, his control fracturing now. He turned back to Morgan, voice dropping into something colder. You think walking back here makes you impressive. You got lucky, that's all. Morgan didn't blink. Luck had nothing to do with it. Then prove it, Cross shot back, the words coming out before he could stop them. Right now, in front of everyone. The challenge hung in the air, reckless and irreversible. Morgan studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. All right. She turned toward the gathered soldiers, her voice carrying effortlessly across the space. Anyone here know what the primary killer is in desert survival? A few hesitant answers came back. Dehydration. Heat exposure. Close, Morgan said. It's panic. The moment you panic, you make mistakes, you waste energy, you die. She glanced back at Cross. The second rule is knowing what you're actually up against. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, the same one she'd been writing in during the briefing days ago. Flipping it open, she held it up. During the brief, I noted 17 tactical errors in the exercise plan. Captain Cross dismissed all of them. She turned a page. When I corrected the map coordinates, he ignored it until his second-in-command verified I was right. When I identified the exposed flank, he called it unnecessary commentary. Her tone stayed level, factual, but every word landed like a hammer. So when the helicopter dropped me without gear, I knew it wasn't an accident, it was retaliation. Cross felt his face flush. That's a serious accusation, it's the truth. Morgan closed the notebook. You wanted me gone because I made you uncomfortable. And instead of addressing that professionally, you endangered my life. Briggs stepped forward, his voice tight. Captain, if she's right about the gear, she's not, Cross said quickly, too quickly. Morgan looked at Briggs. Check the flight log, check the weight manifest. My pack was loaded, it didn't come off with me. Briggs hesitated, then pulled his radio. Command, I need the flight log from drop 047. The seconds stretched. Cross could feel the weight of every stare, the shift in the air as doubt crept into the ranks. The radio crackled. Log shows standard load. Participant pack weight recorded at 22 pounds. No anomalies. Morgan's expression didn't change. Now check what the pilot offloaded when he returned. Another pause. Then the voice came back, quieter. Extra pack logged as forgotten cargo, 22 pounds. The words fell like a bomb. Briggs turned slowly toward Cross, his face unreadable. Around them, murmurs turned into open conversation. Men shifting, whispering, the atmosphere turning. Cross felt the ground disappearing beneath him. That doesn't prove yes, Morgan said quietly. It does. Before Cross could respond, a voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding. What the hell is going on here? Everyone snapped to attention as Colonel Raymond Ashford strode into the circle, his expression carved from stone. He took in the scene, Morgan standing calm, Cross visibly rattled, 200 soldiers watching in tense silence. Someone better start talking, Ashford said. Now, Morgan spoke first, her voice steady. Sir, I'm Chief Warrant Officer Ava Morgan, Special Operations Survival Instructor. I was observing this exercise under orders from JSOC. Cross felt his stomach drop. Ashford's eyes narrowed. JSOC, Morgan nodded. Captain Cross was informed I was an observer. He wasn't informed of my rank or clearance level. That was intentional part of the evaluation. The colonel's gaze swung to Cross. Evaluation of leadership under pressure, Morgan said. Specifically how command responds to external input and stress. Ashford's expression darkened. He looked at Cross. And how did you respond, Captain? Cross opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Morgan answered for him. He left me in the desert without supplies, sir. 16 miles out. No water, no gear, no comms. The colonel went very still. Is that true? Cross tried to find words, tried to shape an excuse, but the silence had already condemned him. Ashford's voice dropped into something cold and final. Captain Cross, you're relieved. Effective immediately. The words hit like a physical blow. Cross felt the eyes of 200 men on him, felt the weight of his career collapsing in real time, and for a desperate moment he tried to salvage it. Sir, she's exaggerating, he said, his voice tight. It was a miscommunication, a training error, not it was deliberate, Colonel Ashford interrupted, his tone absolute. And you just lied to my face about it. Cross' mouth snapped shut. Ashford turned to Briggs. Take him to command. Full investigation starts now. He looked back at Cross and there was no sympathy in his expression. You endangered the life of a senior operator because your ego got bruised. You're done. 2 MPs appeared as if summoned, flanking Cross. He didn't resist, but his eyes found Morgan one last time, searching for something, anger, satisfaction, anything. She just looked at him, calm and steady, the way she'd looked at him every single time he dismissed her. And somehow that was worse than any gloating could have been. They led him away. The crowd began to disperse slowly, murmurs spreading, the story already becoming legend. Ashford waited until the area cleared before turning to Morgan. 4 days in the Mojave with nothing. How bad was it really? Morgan allowed herself a small, tired exhale. Day 2 was rough. Found a seep spring on day 3. After that, just navigation. Ashford shook his head. Most people would have died. Most people aren't trained for it, Morgan said simply. I am. The colonel studied her for a moment. You knew he'd retaliate. I suspected, she admitted. Men like Cross don't handle being corrected well, especially not publicly. And you still pushed. Morgan met his eyes. Because if he couldn't handle being questioned by an observer, he couldn't handle leading men in actual combat. Better to find that out here than downrange. Ashford nodded slowly. Your report's going to end his career. His choices ended his career, Morgan corrected quietly. I'm just writing them down. A pause settled between them, the desert wind pulling at the edges of the tents around them. You could have called for extraction, Ashford said. After the first day, you had your assessment. You didn't need to prove anything. Morgan's expression shifted just slightly. Yes, I did. Why? She looked out at the empty desert, the place that had nearly killed her, the place she'd walked out of on her own terms. Because every woman in the field deals with men like Cross, men who think we don't belong, who think we're fragile or inexperienced or just here for show. Her voice stayed even, but something underneath it hardened. And the only way to change that is to be undeniable. Ashford considered that, then nodded. You succeeded. For now, Morgan said. Until the next one. The colonel's expression softened just slightly. Get some rest, Chief. That's an order. Morgan gave a small nod, then turned and walked toward the medical tent, her steps still steady despite everything her body had been through. Inside, a medic checked her vitals, hydration levels, core temperature. Everything came back stable, dehydrated but not critically, exhausted but functional. You're lucky, the medic said, shaking his head. Morgan didn't correct him. She just accepted the IV fluids, the electrolyte pack, the quiet space to finally sit down without needing to stay alert. Through the tent's open flap, she could see soldiers moving past, glancing her way. Some with respect, some with curiosity, a few with something that looked like awe. One young private paused outside, hesitated, then stepped closer. "Ma'am," Morgan looked up. He struggled for words. "That was the most impressive thing I've ever seen." She studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Then remember it. When someone tells you something's impossible, or that you don't belong, or that you're not good enough, remember that the only opinion that matters is the one you prove with your actions." The private straightened slightly. "Yes, ma'am." He walked away, and Morgan leaned back, letting her eyes close for just a moment. For days ago, Captain Cross had left her in the desert, believing it would break her, humiliate her, force her out. Instead, she'd walked back into his camp and dismantled everything he'd built. Not with anger, not with vengeance, just with the quiet, undeniable proof that she was exactly who she said she was. Weeks later, the investigation concluded. Cross was discharged, his record permanently marked. The story spread through military channels, becoming the kind of cautionary tale that gets told in leadership courses and whispered in officer clubs. And Chief Warrant Officer Ava Morgan went back to her work, training the next generation of soldiers to survive impossible situations, to trust their skills over their fear, and to never, ever underestimate someone just because they don't look like what you expect. Because she'd learned something in that desert, something she carried with her long after the heat and thirst faded. Strength isn't about being the loudest or the most intimidating. It's about being the one still standing when everyone else thought you'd fall. And she was still standing. She always would be.